There is a food that kept human beings alive for 50,000 years. It grew in cracked, salt-poisoned earth. It needed no rain, no irrigation, no farmer to tend it. It fed people through droughts that lasted generations. It stored itself for years without rotting, without technology, without cold chain or chemical preservative, and it asked for nothing in return. Today, most of the world has never heard of it. That is not an accident. What cannot be owned has always made powerful systems uncomfortable. What does not require purchase, replanting, or dependency disrupts the machinery that profits from hunger, and so, quietly, without declaration or ceremony, certain foods are made to disappear, not destroyed, simply forgotten, pushed to the edges, reclassified as weed, rendered invisible inside the architecture of modern agriculture until even the people who once lived by them stop remembering the name. The acacia seed is one of those foods. This is the ancient food files, a place where buried knowledge is recovered, where the foods, the systems, and the wisdoms that disappeared under the weight of commerce and colonization are brought back into the light. If you are watching this and have not yet subscribed, consider this your invitation, not to follow a channel, but to preserve a record. What is remembered cannot be fully erased, and that is the only weapon worth holding. Before you continue watching, please check the link I provided in this video's description. That way, you can verify it yourself. Now, open the archive. Go back 50,000 years, not as metaphor, as archaeology. In the continent now called Australia, on a land so ancient that its geology predates almost all other known human habitation, the Aboriginal peoples of what would become Central and Western Australia were doing something that modern nutritional science is only beginning to fully understand. They were harvesting the seeds of acacia trees, called wattles, grinding them into flour, mixing them with water, pressing them into dense cakes, and surviving on them through conditions that would collapse any modern food system within days. The Anang people of the Western Desert called their deep knowledge of this land Shukurpa. It is often translated as Dreamtime, which is inadequate. Shukurpa is better understood as a living legal and ecological code, a map of how to exist on a landscape without destroying it, encoded across generations through story, ceremony, and practice. Within Shukurpa, the acacia held a specific place. It was not merely food, it was a calendar. The flowering of certain acacias signaled when other foods were ready. The pods told you which way the season was turning. The seeds told you how long the dry would last. This was not superstition, it was precise ecological knowledge, accumulated across time spans longer than the entirety of recorded Western civilization. The acacia is not one plant, it is a genus containing over 1,000 species, distributed across Africa, the Middle East, and most comprehensively across Australia, where approximately 950 species exist, more than anywhere else on Earth. The varieties most harvested by Aboriginal Australians include Acacia victoria, Acacia anira, and Acacia mariana, among others, but the principle holds across them all. The seed pods hang in long flat ribbons from branches that need no river nearby, no green valley, no seasonal rainfall. The trees root deeply, far deeper than most agricultural crops, drawing water from places nothing else can reach. The seeds themselves are extraordinary things to hold, small, dark, dense, they feel heavier than their size suggests. Inside each seed is a protein content of between 20 and 25%, comparable to soybean, which currently dominates global protein agriculture. The fat content is rich in essential fatty acids. The carbohydrate structure includes complex, slow-digesting compounds that modern dietitians would call low glycemic, and the seeds contain iron, zinc, calcium, and magnesium in concentrations that make them, by any clinical measure, a complete survival food. They also contain something agriculture has spent decades trying to engineer into crops artificially: drought tolerance, not as adaptation, as fundamental design. The acacia tree does not merely survive drought, it was built for it. Its root system is a dual architecture: shallow surface roots that catch the brief, rare rains the moment they arrive, and a deep taproot that descends into subterranean moisture reserves that surface plants cannot access. The leaves of many acacia species are not true leaves at all. They are flattened stems, phylloides, that reduce water loss while maintaining photosynthesis. the tree fixes its own nitrogen from the atmosphere through root nodule bacteria, meaning it does not deplete the soil, it rebuilds it. When other plants in a drought landscape are dying from the roots outward, the acacia is quietly stockpiling. When the rains return, the acacia is already ahead. When the seeds fall, they carry a hard seed coat that keeps them viable in dry storage for 3 to 5 years, sometimes longer. They do not require refrigeration, they do not require processing equipment, they do not need to be planted at precisely the right moment in a carefully irrigated field. They wait, in the ground, in a clay pot, in a woven basket, they simply wait. That kind of patience is something modern agriculture has nearly bred out of existence. The historical record of acacia seeds saving lives is not speculative, it is documented, if you know where to look. In 1861, when the Burke and Wills expedition crossed the Australian interior and collapsed, both men dying of exhaustion and starvation, the Aboriginal Dairi people of the region had been living on the same landscape for thousands of years without collapse. Expedition members who survived did so in part by accepting food from Aboriginal guides, including Nardu, a native plant product processed in ways that required deep ecological knowledge. What the survivors rarely recorded with equal respect were the acacia seeds their Aboriginal companions carried. The colonial narrative framed survival foods as primitive. The journals called them emergency measures. They were, in fact, a sophisticated and tested food technology. During the great droughts that struck southeastern Australia in the 1890s and again in the early 1900s, droughts so severe they restructured the pastoral economy of the continent, Aboriginal communities in the interior did not experience the same catastrophic collapse that affected European settlers. Their food systems were designed for exactly this. The acacia was not a backup plan, it was the architecture itself. In the African Sahel, related acacia species, particularly Acacia senegal, were similarly foundational to desert edge cultures during the famines of the late 19th century. The pods and seeds sustained nomadic populations through seasons when grain agriculture failed entirely. In Sudan, in Mali, in Niger, the acacia was not background flora, it was infrastructure. And then, with remarkable speed, it disappeared from the food record. Not because people stopped being hungry, not because a better food was found, but because the systems that replaced traditional food economies had no mechanism for the acacia seed. It did not fit the template. Colonial agriculture in Australia was built around European crops, wheat, barley, oats, that required cleared land, plowed soil, seasonal rainfall, and annual replanting. The acacia tree required none of these things, which made it economically invisible. You could not sell a seed that grew without purchase. You could not charge a farmer for a tree that self-seeded across thousands of hectares and required no agronomy. The commercial food system was not built to include foods that exist outside of transaction. There was another problem. The acacia seed required knowledge to process correctly. Many varieties contain compounds that must be roasted or heat treated to neutralize them before consumption. This knowledge, which varieties, which temperatures, which preparation methods, was held by Aboriginal communities as part of Chickerpa. It was not written down, it was not patented, it was transmitted through practice across generations. When those communities were forcibly displaced from their land, through the systematic dispossession that characterized Australian colonial policy from the mid-19th century onward, that knowledge fractured, children removed from families, elders separated from country, the transmission broken not by time, but by deliberate policy. A food that required indigenous knowledge to prepare safely was now a food that colonial administrators could label as dangerous, unreliable, unmanageable. A food you could not standardize could not enter industrial distribution, and so it was reclassified, not as food, as wilderness. The scientific community began paying attention, quietly, in the 1980s. An Australian researcher named Peter Clute published early analysis of the nutritional content of Australian native seeds. The results were notable enough to prompt further study. By the 1990s, a small but serious body of research had accumulated, mostly from institutions within Australia, documenting what Aboriginal communities had known for millennia: high protein, low glycemic index, rich mineral content, extreme drought tolerance, long shelf life without refrigeration. A 2003 study published in the Journal of the Science of Food and Agriculture measured protein digestibility in several acacia seed varieties and found values comparable to chickpea and lentil, two of the most commercially cultivated legumes in the world. A 2017 review of Australian bush foods, published through Charles Darwin University, noted that acacia seeds contained unique flavonoid profiles with potential antioxidant properties that differed significantly from any commercially cultivated grain. The soil science told its own story. Research into arid zone land degradation, the kind that results from decades of conventional farming on marginal land, showed that acacia integration into agricultural landscapes measurably restored soil nitrogen and reduced erosion. The tree was not simply a food source, it was a land restoration technology. None of this appeared in headlines, none of it restructured the global food market. It was published, peer-reviewed, cited, and then quietly filed. The knowledge was never lost, it was interrupted. There is a difference between those two things, and it matters. Lost knowledge is gone, interrupted knowledge is present in the land, in the seed, in the memory of communities who never fully stopped carrying it. The acacia tree does not require human memory to persist. It does not need to be written in a journal or patented by a laboratory or marketed in a campaign to continue being what it is. It has been doing that for 50,000 years without any of those things. What industrial agriculture cannot own, it cannot control. What it cannot control, it prefers to ignore, and what it ignores does not disappear, it simply grows more slowly, in harder places, in the silences between everything the market chose to amplify. The acacia does not need permission, it does not need rescue. It needs only the one thing that has always been its deepest nature, time, and the soil always provides that. If this record matters to you, if the knowledge of what was buried feels like something worth keeping, subscribe to the Ancient Food Files, not as a gesture, as an act of preservation. Every archive needs witnesses, every buried thing needs someone willing to notice it has not, in fact, disappeared.